Hopefully not least. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, this is a condensation, actually, a little cutting, hopefully not completely out of context, of a larger novel called Glimmer the Bright Moonshine, which is a bit of a picaresque ghost story. This section is a diary written by the sister of the protagonist during her trip to Afghanistan in 1972 with her father, who was a renowned medical professional, a doctor, who was providing medical support in Afghanistan for the population. She's 16, and she's suffering from bacillary dysentery at the moment. It's, the book is a historical, geographical ghost story, triptych including a very few choice cemeteries, not necessarily the ones you would expect, not New Orleans, and definitely not for the reason that you might expect, I hope. Okay, Glimmer the Bright Moonshine. Yesterday, on the 4th day of my terrible illness, well, I've been pretty out of it. Sleeping most of the time and moaning the rest of the time. For several days, my exercise had consisted of raising my buttocks to do you know what, and lowering my head to throw up. Pretty boring. And the pain is unimaginable. The Coochies somehow heard about my illness. Maybe my father or my mother told someone. My parents were both around me all the time when I was awake, but when I was asleep, I don't know what was going on. I'd been awake for about an hour, and I smelled some sweet incense and heard some finger cymbals. And I know that sound because I have a pair and I love to play with them. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But the cymbal sound got a little louder and closer to my room near my open door. My head felt heavy like a bowling ball and my neck was stiff, but I managed to raise it to see who was playing by my door. A little monkey dressed in a multicolored embroidered cap with a matching vest, playing finger cymbals, danced into the room and pranced onto the foot of my bed. I felt a light jolt, which hurt my stomach a little. He couldn't have weighed more than about 8 pounds, though. He stood up next to where my feet were and did a little coochie dance, clanging cymbals as he moved. It was so cute. I was able to smile for the first time in almost a week. Then he jumped off the bed and scampered away. One of the Coochies poked his head inside the door and smiled and said something in his language. Really, if he'd been speaking English, I doubt I would have understood it very easily, but I appreciated it. I gave him what smile I could, not much more. He seemed to understand how limited I was physically, and I'm sure my father told him that I loved the attention. I loved that moment, but I cried right after. I was still not convinced that I would ever see my home in the States again. But then something else happened. I don't really know what to make of it. About an hour after the monkey incident, I seemed to gather just a bit of strength. My father suggested that we might try to go for a little walk, just for a few minutes. Didn't want to do that. I was completely exhausted by my illness and sore everywhere. But I agreed to try. I felt too weak and too tired to protest. I was just wearing panties and a sleeveless top, so he helped me into a light robe. I hadn't had a real bath in all of those days, just a wipe here and there, but I was too weak to really care. I put my feet into my slippers. I couldn't get the bottom of the left slipper to go over my heel without bending over, and I was too exhausted to say anything about it to my father, so I just left it half on. I dragged my feet outside as if they weighed 150 pounds. We made it as far as the fountain that was very close to our grungy shack. I was surprised that I made it that far and worried about my ability to make the return trip back to my bed. We stopped for a minute or two so I could gather a little oxygen and some Afghan dust, of course. I could still hear the finger cymbals in my head, along with everything else that was sloshing around inside there. I rested against the dry west edge of the cinder block wall, knocking loose a handful of dusty dirt, which fell on my shoulder and arm. I brushed it a little and tried not to breathe in the residue, and I gestured to my father that it was time to attempt the journey back to my bed. We took our first step, and out of nowhere this man walked by us. He didn't look like he belonged there. Dressed in a gray and white striped vest, a very light gray, a dusty-looking black suit coat and pants, a white shirt open to the top button. He looked like a relic from Ireland of the 1800s. His craggy, weathered face and his thin, fragile frame made him look about 80. His pure white hair was closely cropped and sticking straight up. At first, my father didn't seem to notice this man who seemed strangely out of place. He was concentrating on me. This man just walked by us, perpendicular to our path. His face came close to mine for a second, about 5 inches. My father looked up at this moment. The man paid no attention to my father. As he crossed our path, he blew hard onto my face. I closed my eyes and instinctively put my hand up to my face. I didn't even see him take a breath. He blew hard, and I heard a gentle whoosh, but I didn't actually feel any air. I did notice a putrid odor, like the pile of decomposing cicadas that I came across when I visited Maryland during the 17-year locust summer. I squinted, and at the same time noticed that this man wasn't even looking at me. My father shouted, "Hey!" The man did not look at him either. He continued past us. My father turned his face to me, astonishment reading all over his face. He didn't know what to say or what to ask. I shook my head gently as my ravaged brains sloshed around in my head. An odd, really creepy experience. We both turned to look at the man, but he was already out of sight. There weren't any immediate alleyways or detours, no obviously open doors. He was just beyond our sight, somehow. We didn't really speak about it. Our body language communicated all that was necessary. Then we concentrated on getting me back to bed. We both expected this to be very difficult, more difficult than the originating walk. But I felt a surge of adrenaline or energy or something. I made it back to the bed without my father's help and somewhat energized. "I'm glad we did that," I told my father. He just looked at me. I'd never seen such an expression on his face. That night I had 2 dreams. The first recalled our trip to Bamiyan to see the amazing giant Buddhas that are carved into the mountain. They should be one of the wonders of the world. In my dream, instead of monks living on the various levels inside the Buddhas, there were hundreds of people rushing in and out, all celebrating something. Then I dreamed about that man. I don't remember much of it, but I do recall his voice, which sounded more like singing than talking. He was saying something about black and white movies, I think. I think he was also talking about his soiled suit, like it needed fitting or something. It's the next day now, and I'm up and about, not out of the woods by any means, but finally able to write this entry in my diary without barfing. I'm still rather weak, but I'm keeping a little food down, not just borrowing it for a few minutes. For the first time since the onset, I'm feeling optimistic that I might just live through this.